Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff, and Joe the scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn, and...
I'm Joe.
I want to drink your blood. Today we're talking about, what do you call them? Completely mythical creatures.
Mythological creatures.
Mythological creatures.
So this is different than cryptids. Cryptids are like modern mythological creatures.
Right.
These are not modern. Essentially, they're from pre-modern
Right,
myths.
right. They absolutely are. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a few stories. The first story is probably the most famous fairy story of all, of any time in history. Although there are lots of people who say they have a friend or relative who's seen a fairy. The first person stories of people seeing a fairy, it was like, I saw a light in the bushes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just like, no, that's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Okay, so in 1920, there were a series of photos of fairies that captured the attention of the world.
What kind of photos?
They were photographs.
Like of a little person with wings? Or...
Yes.
Okay.
The photos have been taken by two young girls. They were cousins. There was Frances Griffith and Elsie Wright. And the pictures were all taken in the garden of Elsie's Cottingley village home. Cottingley is a place in England. So photographic experts at that time, which was very different than it is now, examined the pictures and declared that they were genuine. Spiritualists promoted them as proof of the existence of supernatural creatures. And although there were skeptics who were saying this is not true, the pictures became among the most widely recognized photos in the world.
I don't feel like I've ever seen these
Okay,
pictures.
this is what they consist of. Because it was a long time ago, 1920s, they're black and white. And the photographs consist of a young girl dressed in that era, sitting in a garden setting with fairies on her lap, or a fairy in her hand, or a fairy flying through the air near her.
It's relatively easy to, quote-unquote, Photoshop things into... I think you can tell... It was
much simpler than that. It was so stupid. Okay, so... So all these people looked at him and said, oh, this is absolutely true. It took until the late 1970s for them to finally say, for there to be debunkers that said, no, this is not the case. So at the time, 10-year-old Frances, she was from South Africa, and her cousin Elsie, who was 13 years old, played together in the garden. And they did this often. In July of 1917, the girls asked Elsie's father if they could borrow his camera. They told him they wanted to take a picture of the fairies they had been playing with all morning. The father laughed and agreed and showed him how to use the camera. An hour later, the girls returned saying they'd successfully captured the fairies on film. And so the man developed the plate, which I guess is how they did it then. It was probably on glass plates. He developed it himself. And he could see that there did appear to be a fairy posing with Frances in the photo, but he dismissed it, and assumed it was some kind of trick. He asked Elsie why
who would do the trick?
He asked Elsie why there appeared to be bits of paper in the photo.
Oh, okay.
So the girls just, no, it's fairies. A month later, the girls took another picture, and this time it showed Elsie with a gnome. Elsie's father treated the images as a joke, and he filed them away. However, Elsie's mother, Polly Wright, she had a stronger belief in supernatural things, and she was more intrigued by the photos. And in 1919, she attended a lecture on spiritualism, and afterwards, she showed the pictures to the speaker, asking him, could they be true after all? The speaker brought the photos to the attention of Edward Gardner, who was a leader of the Theosophical movement, and that guy took them to a photographer, Harold Snelling, who examined them, and Snelling said they're absolutely unfaked, they're genuine, they're photographs of a single exposure, open air work, they show movement in all the fairy figures, there was no trace whatsoever of studio work involving cards or paper models, dark backgrounds, painted figures, etc.
Interesting. I mean, presumably, of all those things, he was looking at particular features,
Yeah.
and he couldn't see anything.
He saw nothing that would make him think. And I've seen these photographs. They're really not very well done.
Now, keep in mind, supposedly people back then responded they were very convinced by fakes. Even like the original, first movies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. People were terrified and stuff. Yeah.
Like fainting and stuff.
So the fairy images started circulating throughout the British spiritualist community and soon came to the attention of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. Doyle was a passionate believer in spiritualism. He latched onto those images.
That is extremely ironic.
And he was convinced that they were conclusive photographic proof of the existence of fairies.
Where's all this taking place?
England.
Okay.
In the 1920s. At Doyle's urging, the girls took 3 more pictures of fairies in August 1920, and then Doyle wrote an article about the photographs, which appeared in a magazine called The Strand. And in that article, he passionately argued for the authenticity of the images. That article brought the photographs to the attention of the wider public, and it started an international controversy that pitted spiritualists against skeptics. The skeptics noticed many problems with the photos. In addition to the obvious one, that the fairies look like bits of paper. For instance, in the first photo, why is Frances not looking at the fairies? The girls claimed they were so used to the fairies that they often paid them no attention. And why does the second fairy from the left not have wings? In the second photo, why is Elsie's hand bizarrely elongated? Frances attributed this to camera slant. In the fourth photo, why is the fairy dressed in the latest French fashion? Despite these problems, the photos continued to attract believers. Much of this belief might be attributed to the context of the time. By the end of World War I, the English were emotionally bruised and battered by 4 years of unrelenting bloodshed in the war. So maybe they just wanted to believe in goodness and innocence and, something decent. But they were definitely fakes. They were beautifully drawn images of fairies, probably drawn by Elsie, and staged and photographed by both girls. They'd been copied from images in a book called Princess Mary's Gift Book, which had been published in 1914.
The source for the copies?
They found the copies of girls. So they were little girls, and so the girls copied those pictures of the girls and then added fairy wings.
Yeah, okay.
They held the little cutout fairies upright with hat pins, and that's what they did. And it was as simple as that.
You can tell?
It was cut out. Yes.
I want to see this.
They're cut out pictures of, and the girl obviously had some artistic talent.
What's the name?
It's called the Cottingley Fairies.
Cottingley.
Cottingley.
Yeah. Well, maybe I have seen these.
I mean, come on, look at them.
Yeah, they definitely look like pieces of paper.
They do not look like three-dimensional beings. And for people to have been fooled by this, it's neat, but it's not fairies. Come on.
Yeah, but again, what was it like back then where you hadn't seen tons and tons of Photoshops and AI generated images and CGI and
I guess. But
also some people are just more convinced about stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think people want, like they said, they'd had this war for all these years and people just were eager to see something decent. So in 1983, Elsie confessed to the hoax. And
the little girl?
1983, yeah, she was old. She confessed.
She drew
the pictures and she cut them out and they stuck them upright with hat pins and they took the photographs. And I read something else that there was conjecture that they probably, it started out as just a joke. It was just a fun little lark.
Uh-huh.
And then because the one girl's mother took them to that spiritualist meeting and it just snowballed from there.
Yeah.
It just totally, and when Sir Doyle got a hold of it, then it was out of their control.
Yeah, and imagine being the little girl.
And a little girl, and to say, oh, no, wait, we drew it, all to know that all those people, they'd be angry, because nobody likes to be fooled.
Yeah.
They'd be angry, and it would have been a very uncomfortable situation. Now, it's possible they went to their parents at some point and said, you know what? And their parents might have said, oh, for God's sake, we'll lose our standing in society. You can't say a word.
Yeah.
You know, so who knows? Who knows what else?
That's
what other
pretty
things
stupid.
went on there? It was just,
I mean, that's definitively fake. Unless the fairies got to the little girl when she was an old lady.
no.
And what about the guy who said, yeah, like, oh, look, the limb movement and whatever.
So one of the reasons why people thought that he said that is that he was looking at evidence of photographic tampering, and there was no photographic tampering.
Yeah.
They took photographs of paper cutouts, so the photographs were absolutely genuine.
Yeah.
There was no I don't know the thing about the elongated hand. I couldn't really see what that was about. But
the girl's hand?
it said one of them, the hand looked elongated.
Oh, I guess it's mainly these three that are showing up.
Yeah. Okay, here's another story about fairies. There was a professor in 1891 who worked at home. I don't know whether he always worked at home or he just happened to be working at home this particular day in Chimney Rock in North Carolina. And Chimney Rock is a community in North Carolina, but it also is a place where there's a lot of Native American influence.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like it was a very impoverished place, possibly also. So while he was working at home, some kids came to his door and begged him to come to the side of Chimney Rock Mountain to see the people floating around on the side of the mountain. Now,
he didn't know these kids, or
there's no explanation here. Number one, did he know them? Number two, why would they come to him? Why would they go to a professor working at home? Is it because he's smart? I don't know. That just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so did they go to the...
So the professor just dismissed it, thought they were pranking him because people are not floating around the side of a mountain. But then a few minutes later, an old lady who lived in the village came to his door. She said the same thing. She asked him to come see the ghosts on the side of Chimney Rock Mountain. So
he's a professor.
He's a professor.
So
it didn't say what he was a professor of what.
The professor to go see the things.
Yeah.
I mean, that does seem... it would make sense to kids. You know, like you're the only PhD on the block, and the
You might be the only educated person in the area, yeah. So after the old lady came to his door, he decided he would go take a look just to assure her that there was nothing supernatural going on over there on the side of that mountain. But when he got there, he saw it. There were dozens of bright beings flying around on the side of the mountain, right there on the side of Chimney Rock Mountain.
Bright beings?
Bright beings. He
So
couldn't believe what he was seeing. He said they were bright and they were wearing white gowns. They looked like humans, but they were flying, and there were dozens of them. Some were men.
And they're tiny.
Some were women, and some were children. Yes, they were tiny.
So they're like flat fairies.
They're like what?
Fairies?
Yes, they were. That's what they decided on, that were fairies. So lots of people from the village came that day to see the fairies. Some people called them little people. Some people called them fairies. In later years, some people said that they were actually angels.
Tiny angels.
Never been investigated. Nobody knows what it was.
So consider how easy it was to fool people with paper cutouts.
Yeah.
I mean, you could imagine somebody with string.
Okay, this was 1891. That's true. And those children might have set something up and then gone from house to house telling people come see.
Yeah.
And his was just one of the houses, and that old lady was another house, and then she went to the professor. That could very well be. So the Native Americans have long believed that there are fairy-like creatures. I can't remember what they called them. And
is it lights? I mean, they say they see lights.
They said that they were bright beings flying around.
Well, so about like the Native Americans.
Oh, I don't know. It's really hard to find out specifics because, for one thing, people romanticize anything Native Americans do. They romanticize, and so it is altered drastically in the retelling by white people because they want to romanticize the whole thing.
Yeah, and word of mouth and things evolve.
Mm-hmm.
But so, like, here's what I think. there are tiny beings that emit light and fly around. They're fireflies. And also swamp gas, as much as that's a meme, a joke.
Yeah, yeah.
It is actually supposedly a real thing.
Yeah.
Like some chemical, or it's like methane or something ignites or something like that.
Yeah.
There is light that appears in swampy areas.
There's something else. Let me actually look that up, because there's something else.
At least as far as I've looked into it. There's also other things like rare atmospheric phenomena that have been proven to exist, but it's not really like, like ball lightning. You'd know if there was ball lightning around. As far as I know, it's pretty loud. It's like for instance, when there's electrical discharge from a power wire, it's really obvious. You can't not notice it.
When I was in Wisconsin last time, there was a pretty good storm passing just to the east of the place, and there was ball lightning, and it sounded like a jet was crashing. You
saw it?
Yeah.
You saw balls of light?
I did not see the balls of light, but what I could see through the clouds is it was clearly just a ball of behind the clouds. I didn't, there was no...
Because as far as I know, it's a pretty rare thing.
It was, when I was a kid, we used to see it. We also saw lightning that rolled. It'd be like a ball that would roll.
Like goes forward and comes back and goes forward.
No, it just would roll. It would just roll through the air. It would be a ball that would just roll.
Huh, interesting.
Okay, so this is what it says about swamp lights. Some people say it's believed to be ignition of the gas made in the swamp, like the bacterial decomposition of the organic matter.
Yeah, but swamps do emit like natural gases.
So they're called will-o'-the-wisps, and this is what this one said. Gases rise from the soil and water to escape into the atmosphere. The methane mixes with the phosphines and creates blue lights hovering over. So it's not ignited on fire.
It's not an exothermic reaction.
Yes.
It's actually
a chemical
luminescence.
Yeah. But you have to wonder that they said that they could see their gowns and that they were men, women, and children.
Yeah, well, you could imagine it's like how air carries plasma with electricity or whatever. There's a drifting,
But they could see like gowns, fluttering. They could see men, women, and children.
And then they make themselves, especially if there's multiple people.
That's true.
The idea of crowd mentality and crowd hysteria or whatever they call that.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's definitively like, people do go completely nuts when they're, but certainly, especially when people are excited, they can believe some really weird things.
In 1663, a skeleton was found in a cave in Germany. A German scientist, Otto von, I'm probably going to mangle this, Guericke, believed that the skeleton had belonged to a unicorn.
So there was the idea of unicorns before this?
Apparently. So an excavation in 1872 revealed that the bones of that skeleton belonged to various animals. Someone had reconstructed the bones to make a fake unicorn skeleton.
They knew that by genetic analysis?
Well, in 1872, they're just looking at it. They're not doing genetics. They're just looking at it.
Imagine you see a chimera from ancient mythology, creature with, does each part have its own genes? Maybe it wasn't a unicorn. Maybe it was a chimera.
Well, it could be, but they identified it as being the bones and parts of different animals. So I would assume that they didn't fit together.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, true. I suppose regardless if it was a living creature, it would have to have joints that went together,
have to go
or
together,
else it's going to be in pain. And
for a long time, it was believed that Guericke was the one who reconstructed the unicorn skeleton. However, recent research suggests that he was not the one who reconstructed the skeleton.
Remember that monkey fish? It was supposed to be a mermaid or something, but it was a monkey that had a fishtail attached to the bottom. I guess, if you imagine you're a taxidermist who's also a freak, and you want to, stir some shit up. So you attach a horn to a horse.
Yeah. So that skeleton is actually on display at the Museum of Natural History in Magdeburg, Germany. But here's the thing. A lot of people over the ages claim to have seen real unicorns. They're people who actually believe they've seen them. And it has to come from somewhere. And we'll go into that in a minute. But in 2010, a shaky YouTube video with a white unicorn gained lots of attention. They said that the unicorn had been seen in Don Valley, Canada. Nobody knows where, what was it? Nobody knows.
So they saw sightings of it?
They took a YouTube video of it.
And so there's a YouTube video of a unicorn.
A unicorn, but it's shaky. So, they're all shaky. They're always shaky.
They're always shaky.
Jennifer Schilling on Quora said, unicorns are associated with purity most of the time, and in some cases are considered fairy creatures. I would say you're most likely to spot a unicorn in a place untouched by any sort of pollution and far from large concentrations of iron.
Okay, what is a fairy figure? I've heard things being fairy or fairy-like.
Fae.
Yeah, what is that?
Okay, let's look up what it says about the word fairy. A fairy is a mythological being or legendary creature found in folklore as a form of spirit.
So it's not.
It's usually
more
has a
ethereal.
diminutive. It usually has a diminutive human form. Yeah, it's mystical creature.
Well,
so I don't know why they're saying that this lady is saying that unicorns are fairy creatures, because they're not tiny and they're not happy and they're, I don't know. I don't understand. But anyway, she says that unicorns are hunted for their horns. They're intelligent. They choose to live in secluded areas. And so you're probably just not going to run into one. And all summed up, unicorns would live in the darkest and wildest forests of the world, far from the touch of human hands. Finding one would be an impossible task, even with technology.
So they're saying it's built into it
that you're
not going to see one.
Yeah. But who's hunting them for their horns? That's what I want to know. They're hunted for their horns? That means their horns exist. Show me a freaking
one
unicorn
horn. Yeah.
Yeah, show me one.
That's not like
and then we'll
a rhino
test it.
horn.
Yeah. Here, you're going to love this one. February 26th, 2016, Madera, California, where Rook Stone lives. Drivers there reported seeing something weird, and they called the police. Lots of drivers.
So
Lots of people. That Wednesday night, multiple drivers saw and reported seeing on the freeway a unicorn. It turned out it was a white pony dressed up as a unicorn for a kitty birthday party. It had gotten away and wandered the area for a few hours. She was found in a nearby orchard and returned to her owner.
So it had, they attached a horn to it?
Yeah.
So they weren't wrong.
No, I think it's funny, though, that there were people calling and saying there's a unicorn on the highway.
Imagine this. You are living in the 1600s or whatever, and you have a horse, and you have some string, and you have this paper mache horn. Yeah. So
you could totally mess, and you could mess with people's minds. And people back then were no different than people are today. They're tricksters. They're serious people.
Yeah.
People are people. And so I can totally see that somebody would do something like that. So as for real unicorns, thanks to a newly discovered skull fossil found in the Pavlodar region of Kazakhstan, we now know that the unicorn, or Elasmotherium sibericum, roamed the planet roughly 29,000 years ago. But guess what? It looked like a rhinoceros.
Yeah. Really stocky.
Yeah, they weigh twice as much as a modern rhino, which weighs a lot.
So they're huge.
And they're also known as the Siberian unicorn.
They are...
it's just a giant rhino.
Ice Age rhino.
Yeah, it's just a giant...
Like the mammoth-fied version of a rhino.
Right.
So...
Although their horn, I think, was longer and straighter.
So There are modern animals, though, that if you hadn't seen a photograph of one, you might like draw a picture of it, take it back home, and people would think, oh, it's a horse with a horn. And those are like what are they? Gazelles have straight, really long, straight horns.
And kind of curly, yeah.
Rhinos themselves have. I mean, if you weren't a very good drawer,
well, a gazelle for sure, because it's very much, it's got more of the slender form of a horse, unlike a rhino. I could see that. I could totally see that. So
actually, if you draw any of those things in profile, their ear might look like a horn. And so, I mean,
that's true.
We're talking about terrible drawers.
That's true.
Back then, the typical like style was like the standardized, I'm not very good at drawing style.
Okay.
And they drew things in profile and they just really didn't look accurate.
Are there any cave drawings of unicorns?
But see, it is conceivably possible that humans in the northern hemisphere lived alongside giant woolly rhinoceroses. Rhinoceri? And modern people live alongside rhinoceroses. So the cave drawings, I mean, I'd expect cave drawings of equine creatures with a single horn.
Here's the most famous cave drawing of a unicorn.
That does not look.
It could be a gazelle. I mean, seriously.
Oh, I see. The horn is out front. Yeah, exactly. But and also beyond that, chimeras, mythological chimeras from before ancient Greeks, even those were a thing. So
another thing to consider is that there's always variations of normal. There are people who are born with I guess it would actually be a conjoined twin that is absorbed into their body, so they have another face on the back of their head.
So
you can't say that. Well, there was a whole tribe of people, two-faced people. No, there was a weird thing where this poor soul was born with a face on the back of their head. So it could have been that a ram was deformed,
and it had
more
a
slender
foot sticking out from its head.
You don't know. So I don't think that. First of all, I don't think that the one in Siberia you could call, even though its name is a Siberian.
It is a literal unicorn.
It is. Yes, it is a literal unicorn, but it is not a unicorn like anybody's talking about.
Yeah.
It's a rhinoceros.
Okay, but here, what would it take for there to be a horse?
Horses don't have.
There's multiple layers to this. One, there is the Fey unicorn, which is a only semi-corporeal creature, it sounds like. So it is, I'm going to use your most hated phrase of mine, the astral realms. There's a disconnected physical whatever component of the universe that is like inhabited by spirits and fairies and whatever. That's the Fey zone. The unicorns from the Fey zone apparently can come over to physical reality and prance around. Okay. There's that unicorn, and then there's the unicorn that is a creature that like presumably evolved like everything else or whatever, it was created, and it is like a horse and it has a horn and they went extinct or whatever. They're isolated in one particular small area. No one's seen one. Okay, there's that, and then there's like the actual modern, probably accepted explanation. It was a deformed horse, or it was like a corruption of the image of a rhinoceros or whatever. What would it take for any one of those to be true? And what's the likelihood? What's your confidence that would be true? Like a deformed horse, there's images of that. We know that happens. People have seen that in modern time. They exist right now. So that's like, or like a bad drawing of a rhinoceros. Okay, that happens, and we we know that happens. We have evidence of happening. We can see it. You can look it up on the internet. There are those. That's a real thing. The creature that has a horn and it's like a horse and whatever. That's all else being equal. That's probably the least likely of them, because we would find a skeleton that matches the skeleton of a horse, but it also has a long straight.
Well, except that if it was an isolated event and then it spread like a fable, people talked about it, it wouldn't necessarily be something that you're going to stumble across because of its isolated event.
Oh, you're saying like it was in one tiny area.
Or just like that's just one out of a million horses are born with this bony protrusion on their forehead.
Yeah.
Or whatever those things are.
That could be in the category of this is a deformed horse thing.
But the other things...
we know happens.
The other things, there would be evidence. If it was enough that...
Well, okay. A Fey being from the Fey zone coming over, that there might not necessarily be evidence, because the basic assumptions, like for instance, you blow the unicorn's head off and then its body just magically disappears and sparkles. You can't assume if you blow its head off that its body will stay there. The basic assumptions now fall away. So what I would say with anything like that is, if you're making bigger and bigger changes to the reality that you're very confident in, then you should also decrease your confidence in that being the actual reality of reality. So, like the phase zone, that would take a lot of that's a big difference from the regular here and now of day-to-day life. The stuff you're really confident in. The phase zone, you should not be very confident in. Now, if you know there is something and you don't know the characteristics of it, but you know there's something like a phase zone or the phase zone, but it's like you don't know really, you shouldn't then start saying, yeah, there's like fairies and stuff, unless you're very confident in that. And so this also applies to the fairies too. Like if there are fairies in the fairy zone, then it's an issue to say anything about their existence in regular life, because you're now like stretching reality to things that you have no experience with.
Okay, so I'm gonna repeat something, not verbatim, but just as well as I can remember, that Kay, my midwife partner, said on several occasions. She said, there are lots of people who say that they have seen UFOs or aliens. Lots of people. There are not that many people who say they've seen a fairy or a unicorn. So,
yeah, proportionally, that's true. You'll meet people.
Right.
I know, like, almost everyone I know has a UFO story. Right.
And really, if somebody, even an angel story, because the whole idea of angels is more like, somebody kind approaches you on a dark and stormy night when your car's broken down and fixes it, and then you say they were an angel. They were an angel, I'm sure.
That's more likely to be a story than...
Right, but not a fairy, I wish there were fairies. I wish there were.
However, before UFOs, before Bigfoot, and before, what was it like, the mythologies of the day 200 years ago in England or in Central Europe?
Okay, so clearly those little girls who made the fairies had heard stories of fairies. Yeah. And so you wonder, did those stories emerge into folklore because of will-o'-the-wisps, those swamp gases?
Yeah, so...
Or was it, something else, or a story that you tell children? You just tell children stories. And, when you guys were little, I would tell you stories about tiny people who lived in the walls. And I didn't call them fairies. I just said they were tiny people who lived in the walls. So people tell stories like that.
It's interesting. I bet there's some... So, like, if you imagine there's events through time, and then the information spreads through people from those events through time as well. If there's, like, a big event, and then it spreads through time, that should have a characteristic. But for other things, they're not going to be big events. They're going to be lots of smaller events through time. And I bet there's a distinct characteristic between one and the other category of frequency of events. Like Jesus dies. That's a huge event. Versus XYZ person in ABC Village sees a fairy, a will-o-wisp, and then it evolves into a fairy, or Jesus evolves into a supernatural entity, And so I would suppose that will-o'-the-wisps will naturally evolve into, for humans, like fairies.
Yeah. Okay, so this next story is, whereas the first two, the points are well taken of how those stories may have evolved to be spread and to be embraced and believed in. But this one, there is actually some scientific truth behind it. And you won't believe me when I tell you.
Okay.
Actually, you probably will. You probably already know this. So vampires are said to be evil beings who roam the world at night searching for people whose blood they feed upon. Most people associate vampires with Count Dracula, the blood-sucking subject.
Who was literally the first vampire, right?
You just hang on. He was a blood-sucking subject of Bram Stoker's epic novel, Dracula, which was published in 1897, so that's a long time ago. But the history of vampires began long before the author of that book was even born. So the main characteristic of a vampire is they drink human blood, and they typically drain the blood out of their victim using sharp fangs, which kills them, and then those people turn into vampires. Right? That's kind of
yeah.
They hunt at night since sunlight weakens their powers, and some might have the ability to turn into a bat or a wolf. Vampires have super strength and often have a hypnotic, sensual effect on their victims. They also can't see their image in a mirror or shadows. They have no shadow. So it's debatable if Bram Stoker named Count Dracula after Vlad Dracul, also known as Vlad the Impaler, who was a real person who lived in Transylvania in the 1400s. But vampire superstition thrived in the Middle Ages, especially as the plague decimated entire towns. The disease often left behind bleeding mouth lesions on its victims, which to the uneducated was a sign of vampirism. And it wasn't uncommon for anyone with an unfamiliar physical or emotional illness to be labeled a vampire. Researchers also point at a disease called porphyria. It's a blood disorder that can cause severe blisters on your skin if you're exposed to sunlight, and that may have contributed to the vampire legend. Interestingly, some symptoms of porphyria can be temporarily relieved by drinking blood.
Is it the iron or?
I don't know. Other diseases blamed for promoting the vampire myth include rabies or even goiter. But there are people who call themselves vampires. They're normal seeming people. They drink small amounts of blood in a misguided effort to be healthy.
Oh, wait, because there are people who think blood is like a vital energy or something,
right.
And so they consume blood or even get blood transfusions.
Yeah.
But there are also people who believe themselves to be vampires who do it because they think of themselves like the
supernatural,
like a mythological vampire.
Yeah. So the communities of those self-identified vampires can be found on the internet and in cities and towns around the entire world. Most modern vampires keep to themselves and typically conduct their feeding rituals, which include the drinking of blood of willing donors, and they do it in private. And I shouldn't have to say this, but I will. Ingesting the blood of other people is extremely dangerous. Extremely.
Bloodborne illnesses. People love myths, and it just so happens that vampires, things like fairies, unicorns, those are just like the perfect myths for humans to talk about. You're never going to see one, probably, hopefully. And they are just so colorful, colorful myths.
Right. I think that one thing to take away from the vampire thing is that people who were truly sick, who had diseases,
oh yeah,
were blamed probably for other people getting sick.
Yeah.
You know, so it
and you could then see how that idea is corrupted over time.
I'm all for having an open mind and considering there might be more out there than we know about, but I'm not a believer in the idea that any of those creatures are real at this point in time. I just don't believe it.
Yeah.
What do you think? Our contact information is in the show notes. You can email us, text us, or even call and leave a 3-minute voicemail. And as always, if you have a story you want to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.